In December of 2011, famed atheist and journalist Christopher Hitchens died. As many followers of my work and that of the Fixed Point Foundation will know, Christopher was a friend of mine and, as he put it, a debate partner. What is little known about Christopher, by American audiences at any rate, is that the late atheist brother, Peter, is a Christian. A few months after Christopher's death, his widow, Carol, was kind enough to invite me to attend a memorial service in Christopher's honor in Manhattan. It was there that I first encountered Peter. 2 years Christopher's junior, the similarities between the two brothers were striking. Peter sounds like Christopher and even looks a great deal like him. More than that, their manner, their gestures, they're remarkably the same. In a ceremony that lasted, roughly 2 hours and celebrated all that was not holy, Peter's remarks really stood out. When it came his turn to speak, he simply walked up to the lectern and he quoted Philippians 4:8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. I was intrigued and there decided that I wanted to meet Peter. Besides, Christopher had been urging us to meet for years, and that probably has something to do with the fact that Christopher knew so few Christians and naturally thought that such people should meet. Now, with Christopher's passing, I decided to make the effort to do just that. You may wonder about the relationship between the two. It's been written a lot about and discussed on television and radio, and the fact is that the relationship between the two brothers had been strained for decades. And I think it was for an obvious reason. They did not share the same worldview. Add to that the unfortunate coincidence that they worked in the same profession, and it's a very public profession at that, journalism. Comparisons were inevitable, and because of his Christian faith and social conservatism, often unfavorable to Peter, who nonetheless achieved some fame in his own right. After a mildly contentious email exchange, Peter agreed to meet with me in London. It was a beautiful fall day when I arrived at the place of his choosing, Clark's Restaurant on Kensington High Street. As with the first time I met his brother, I really didn't know what to expect when I met Peter. That he could be difficult, I knew from the emails. I wasn't sure if this was a product of family upbringing. Christopher could also be brusque. Or was it to be attributed to the difference in our cultural backgrounds? You see, Southerners like me are often taken aback by what they tend to interpret as ill-mannered Yankees, or in this case, Englishmen. His prickliness was, I think you'll see, evident from the start. But so was his wit. And as the conversation unfolded, it was clear that he warmed to the conversation and to me. The fact is, I liked him. Hyper-opinionated, the discussion was anything but boring as he pronounced authoritatively on everything from bicycles to mass transportation to Winston Churchill and the causes of the First World War, as in this exchange.
Why would anybody fly if they could do anything else? To slog for hours to a concrete jungle where security men make you take your shoes off and your trousers down and peer at you through scanners for hours and hours and hours. And then you get into an uncomfortable tube and are wafted to somewhere you don't particularly want to go. No one can ever attract me to go anywhere. Saying, look, we'll fly you there.
Well, what if we were to say I would send a taxi to pick you up? What would be your opinion of that?
Well, as you know, I hate taxis. Long ago, I was sitting in one. I thought, mile for mile, this is more expensive than Concorde. Where is the Dom Perignon?
So I take it you would prefer to go nowhere.
No, I don't mind. No, I think, well, the last trains, there often aren't trains, places where you want to go. And the great train which one would really want to take would be the Moscow to Jerusalem Express, which is impossible in so many ways that it certainly won't happen in my lifetime. But trains they've been robbed of their joy. When was the last time you saw a restaurant car with white tablecloths and silver cutlery jingling on them and big windows looking out? They've gone. They've all been blandified and air-conditioned out of existence. I remember dining cars on French trains and Italian trains and German trains and indeed on Czech trains winding slowly through the mountains of Bohemia while very slow communist waiters brought you beer and stew. And all these adventures have gone. The smells and delights of train travel have by and large been abolished. So even that doesn't have the joy for me that it used to have.
I had not anticipated our discussion ranging so far afield, but was, in the end, glad that it did. In retrospect, what you will hear is less of a discussion or even an interview than it is a monologue. Peter, again, like his late brother, likes to talk, and he isn't much interested in the views of others. As Clark's breakfast patrons enjoyed their coffee and crumpets on white tablecloths and car alarms sounded in the streets, Peter wasn't the least put off of his subjects. He marched on from topic to topic with admirable focus. So pull up a chair to our table, get a cup of coffee, and listen in. Let's begin with a little bit of your biography. I read your book, Rage Against God, and it was very interesting to me how you gave what I really thought was a very self-deprecating view of your own life. Indeed, I would even say it was quite harsh in the manner in which you spoke of your past as it related to your relationship, not just with your parents, but your views of God and so forth. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you eventually became a Christian.
Oh, I'd much rather specific questions. The reason I wrote it like that was because that it's true, and also George Orwell once said that no memoir which didn't contain something utterly disgraceful simply couldn't be trusted. If anybody writes about themselves in a complimentary way, then you know it's not true, and it just follows the usual rule that all autobiography is fiction and all fiction is autobiography. So I just wanted to write a truthful account within reason. I obviously kept quite a lot back, and say clearly in the book that I keep quite a lot back, because there are some things which is nobody's business to know but mine and those who already know them. So I'm not really given to much in the way of confession. If you've got specific questions, you're very welcome to answer them. And if I feel like answering them, I will, and if not, I'll tell you that I'm not answering them.
Fair enough. Well, you became an atheist. What drew you to atheism?
Selfishness. The desire to be as selfish as possible, which is very strong in adolescent males.
So you would agree then with Huxley's remark that that those who declare themselves atheists, they do so not purely for metaphysics, but because they seek some sort of liberation.
Of course not. Metaphysics is a choice. You can't look at the universe and say, I know for certain that it is either a God-designed and purposeful place with embodying justice or a meaningless chaos, because there's no way of knowing. And so you choose which one you wish to believe, and the choice is usually not conscious in that extent, but anybody who chooses the atheist worldview must surely have at some point considered how useful it would be. But the other interesting thing about choosing the atheist worldview is it's very good for you, and it makes life completely different for you, but only if lots of other people don't do the same thing, which has always seemed to me to be the reason why so many atheists are not very anxious to discuss their reasons for doing it, because if everybody else latches on it, if prominent, well-off, established atheists living in pleasant suburbs and comfortable homes found that the tradesmen who served them, the people who cleaned their houses, the people who taught their children, everybody they dealt with took the same attitude towards the university they took, they'd very rapidly find it very inconvenient, wouldn't they? They must be hoping that the people they're dealing with are still in some way influenced by the Christian ethic.
So it's only a society such as a Western society that is heavily influenced by a Judeo-Christian worldview that can really produce atheists of the sort that we see in our own time.
Well, of that sort, yes. Though, of course, no. I'm sorry about this frightful noise. It's just inevitable. A helicopter will come over in a moment. I don't know what use these alarms are. No one ever pays any attention to them. That sort of atheist, the sort of atheist who chooses a fundamentally selfish existence in a society which isn't, at least yet, infected by the same thing, is. But the sort of person who, being powerful and rich, chooses to believe that there is no justice because he doesn't want any, flourishes in most sorts of society. And the atheists will always say, the number of atheists will always claim that Christians think that they're good, which they don't, and they will also always claim that Christians think that atheists can't have morality. Of course they can have morality. Everybody wants a morality of some sort, or they couldn't leave the house in the morning. It would be too dangerous to go out. So they want something, but they don't want something that weighs too heavily on them. So I'm always baffled by the way people, in fact some Christians, speak as if the golden rule is a Christian principle. The golden rule, do as you would be done by, is actually appear to do as you would be done by. And anybody can do that. Anybody experienced in office politics or indeed public politics or public life knows that most people aren't as they appear to be. But by appearing to be, and the number of people who are said to be terribly nice guys, and the late Jimmy Savile, the show business personality in this country, is now utterly excoriated and scorned, for years and years and years lived on the view that he did a lot for charity and was kind to his mother and was a good person. He turns out to be an absolute disgrace. But as long as he was alive, he could persuade people that he wasn't. So the do as he would be done by worked very well for him because he appeared to be good. So it goes much deeper. If you acknowledge that there is at some point some force, person, whatever it is, who knows what you're really like, then that has a very different effect on morality from the idea that you will be judged on what other people think you are. No man is a hero to his valet, and certainly no man is a hero to God.
Was atheism something of an intellectual fashion?
No, as I say, it was all to do with no. I've never regarded myself as an intellectual, and I would never have dignified it like that. It just seemed to me to suit the world in which I was growing up. Boys' boarding schools in the middle 1960s in England were pretty crude places where you had to learn to look after yourself. And I had learned to look after myself. It was a fair measure of revenge and spite were necessary out of self-protection. So you learnt the rules of the jungle quite early on anyway. And after a while I found it in many ways that suited me rather nicely, thank you very much.
Dostoevsky saw atheism.
Also, Christianity seemed to be, there was something so soppy and weak about
very
it.
Sentimental, rather than having real substance.
Well, it didn't seem very masculine to me.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Dostoevsky saw atheism and communism linked. You would eventually move towards communism. Were the two linked for you?
Well, I suppose so, yes, because they arise out of similar things, but I didn't really see the link clearly until a lot later. And the thing about all utopian political systems is that they're ultimately based on power worship.
Were you very open about these views in your youth?
Oh, yeah.
How did your parents react
not
to that?
be. Oh, terribly. They were most distressed.
What were your parents' religious views, if any?
I've no idea whether my mother had any religious views or not. We never discussed it at home. As far as I could gather from occasional muttered remarks, my father was a sort of agnostic who had an awful lot of very strict Calvinism rammed down his throat when he was a child and was reacting against it. And the division in his family was that the male children were brought up according to their father's strict baptism, and the female children brought up according to their mother's pretty Protestant but more relaxed Anglicanism.
Did you feel that your own atheism was in any way provoked, as it were, by a soft, cultural kind of Christianity to which you referred before?
No, I was provoked. I think I've always, I didn't examine it much at the time. It was something which came quite easily to me and seemed to me to be the sensible conclusion from what I saw around me. I don't claim to have thought very much about it. I'd become against boarding school the kind of licensed, cherished, mild troublemaker and eccentric who was able to get away with saying things and got some kudos out of being adventurous in what I said in class and other places. So it massaged my own ego quite a bit.
When did you begin?
Show off. And show-offs always like to shock people, and so that's when I learned that you could get quite a lot of fun out of shocking people and making them laugh, and out of taking an attitude towards the world and life which was wholly cynical.
When did
Worked
you begin
for me?
When did you begin to reevaluate these views?
When I grew up.
I believe your book says it was in the early 90s, and you found yourself reconsidering the Christian faith.
Yeah, I did find myself, but as I say, the reasons for that are both simultaneously cliched in terms of their general nature and extremely private in terms of their particular nature.
Sure.
So then I don't find it interesting to discuss the generalities, nor am I prepared to discuss the particular.
You make a remark along these lines in your book. You say that you were an atheist at a time when perhaps culturally that was less the norm, and by the time that you came back to the church, it was a little too late.
Oh, I'm always ahead.
The church needed you.
I'm never fashionable. The trouble is, I mean, it's not. It just is the case that there is the curse of Cassandra, always to be right and never to be believed, is one way of looking at it, or just being perhaps a little sharper at spotting trends than other people. I tend to, 35 years ago, I started riding a bicycle in London, and everybody thought I was mad. And there were no bicycle lanes, and all my colleagues actively disapproved of me for doing this. And now you can't move in London for people on bicycles. You must have nearly been killed by several of them on your way here. It's completely taken over. It's generally now seen to be an extremely rational thing to do. I did that years ago. Lots of other things I could lay claim to. I just have this, you could call it a talent or a gift, which is not my responsibility, which is just of sometimes seeing things a little clearer. I've obviously spotted a trend for atheism when it was on the way up. I'm just hoping that my current set of political and religious opinions will become fashionable in time as well.
Well, hopefully you'll give me a
But
tip.
at this rate,
you invest in the stock market.
Probably, I'm not telling you about that, but probably after I'm dead. I can usually predict election results without much difficulty. It's not difficult. All you need to do is read the opinion polls, not the newspaper accounts of them, but the actual figures. And ignore the political spin that's placed on it and see what's going to happen. It's not difficult. Prediction is not actually terribly difficult. The exact time at which things will take place is hard. But
you don't consider yourself an evangelical. Tell us how you would define.
I can't. I'm very English, and the English view of these things is to eschew enthusiasm. In fact, I think there's somewhere in the 13 Articles there's an actual condemnation of enthusiasm as such. I don't believe in it, and it's the joke is told about the man who's approached on the street by someone who says, "Are you saved? Aren't you saved?" And eventually he says, "Well, I suppose I might be." And I said, "Well, why on earth aren't you doing as I'm doing, running up and down the street, shouting for joy and saying I'm saved?" And the man says, "Well, it was such a narrow squeak. I thought it was probably wiser to keep quiet about it." I don't. It just doesn't appeal to me. I have no idea what awaits me on the other side of the grave. And this confidence that people seem to have in their savedness, I find absurd.
How do you reconcile that, say, with something like the Great Commission?
I just say I'm afraid you can say anything you like and you can quote anything you like, but to me it just seems to me to be impossible. After all, the declaration that you're making of faith and everything else, what is the test of it? Who's got a faithometer? Who can say that the person who says that he believes on the Lord Jesus Christ actually does so? How do you know? Do you believe in the resurrection? Well, sometimes of day it's easier than others.
Give us your assessment of the state of British Christianity at present.
Finished.
No hope.
I reckon this will be an Islamic country in 100 years.
In how long?
100 years. Maybe sooner. I don't know. And the demographics are strong. The most popular boy's name registration now is Mohammed.
What do you think happened? How did British Christianity find itself in this position?
The First World War happened. The First World War was the equivalent of the collapse of the Roman Empire. The First World War was the great moment at which European Christendom came to an end. It hasn't. It's only existed in shadow form since then. It has particular forms of showing itself all over various parts of Europe, but in England, the church, the idea that being a believing member of the Christian church was normal came to an end somewhere between 1914 and 1918. I would think sometime around about the Christmas truce of 1914 was probably the death blow.
Make that connection.
Here we have hundreds of thousands of men brought up as gentle Christians, believing in the principles of the Sermon on the Mount, being sent off to fight a war in which they kill their prisoners, in which they're surrounded by the corpses of their friends being eaten by rats, in which there are no funerals, in which the religious observance seems completely irrelevant. And at home, the principal voices of the church to which they belong are urging on this advance into barbarism with shrill cries of enthusiasm. And at the same time, every other source of authority in society, from law, politics, education, culture, great authors, all the rest of it, they're all engaged in this cause, telling you this is a good cause, this is what we must do, and then they get there and find out what it is. And then those who don't die come back, and they have to live unable to talk about what they've seen because no one will believe them, because it's sickening anyway, amid that society for the next 40 years of their lives, often maimed, and the people bereaved by it have to live with it. They are told it's a great cause, and they have a pretty good idea that their husbands, brothers, fathers, sons don't appear to have died for nothing. And 1939 comes along, and the last conceivable justification for the thing, that it was a war to end wars, is blown away like a cobweb. And what's left? It was the Great War. The medal that my great-uncle was given at the end of it says on the back of it, the Great War for Civilization. Well, it was nothing of the kind, nor was it a war to end war. It was a complete and utter ramp, and it was urged on people by the Christian churches. They said, you should do this. This is your duty. Go out and do this terrible thing. Go out and murder large numbers of people with machine guns, swathes, cutting people down like corn in front of you, and watch it being done to your friends and neighbours by the thousand, week after week after week after week. And what effect that have on a civilization? Well, it devastates it, and we've never recovered from it, and we never will. What's more, we still, to this day, we don't really confront it.
Do you think it's fair to...
There are still people who are prepared to defend the First World War and the way in which it was fought. And in some ways worse, there are still people who will not cast any kind of cold eye on the Second World War, which was the replaying of the whole thing, during which this country deliberately bombed civilians in their homes.
Conventional wisdom would say that the First World War was an unnecessary war, but the second one was a just war. You don't agree with that assessment?
Well, it's more complicated than that. I mean, justice in wars is always hard to seek, and parts of it were just and parts of it weren't. But what it certainly isn't is the... This is a blowback. One gets tired of the constant justification for war, which is, it comes from the politicians. That they, in all cases, when they're talking about war, they are Winston Churchill. You are Neville Chamberlain for opposing them. And he, whether it's Manuel Noriega or Saddam Hussein or whoever it is, he is Hitler. All this template is placed upon all conflicts. And it doesn't work. It didn't work in Iraq. It didn't work in Panama. It didn't work, in my view, in Yugoslavia. These people weren't Hitler, and the people who attacked them were not Churchill. But the trouble is, the more you examine this, you realize that Churchill wasn't Churchill either, nor was Roosevelt. Though Stalin was definitely Stalin, and he was our principal ally. And we, to construct an alleged good war out of a war which involved us in an unscrupulous alliance with the second worst mass murderer of modern history, and in which we appeased that mass murderer to the extent that we handed him half of Europe for 50 years, seems to me to be a bit of a stretch in terms of just war argument. And then when you examine how actually this country came to be involved in the Second World War, and the diplomatic teenage amateurism which brought it about, if you want to go to war with the principal land power of Europe, which you may think is a wise thing to do in general, it seems to me to be sensible to do so when you have an army. In 1939, we did not have an army, and yet we declared war on the Third Reich. If an individual behaved like this, he would be confined in a lunatic asylum. In history, it's described as a brave move and the beginning of our finest hour, during which one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen was very nearly subjugated and occupied, simply through incompetence. You can't. These things are evident if you read the history of it, but it has to be portrayed differently. I mean, Churchill was absolutely right not to surrender. But why on earth were we in the position, being the greatest empire in the world, why on earth were we in the position in May 1940 where we were actually in danger of having to make peace with this mountebank?
But you can't blame Churchill for that.
No, I don't. Yeah. I don't blame Churchill for that. In fact, there are many things for which one can criticise Winston Churchill, but that's the one which he gets away with. But the thing is, why were we in this position in the first place?
Pacifism.
That's what I don't know. No, not pacifism at all. The reason we were in it was because we guaranteed the independence of Poland in May 1939. A guarantee we had absolutely no intention of fulfilling, and which we didn't have the capacity for, and which gave the power of starting a second European war to Joseph Beck, Foreign Minister of Poland.
But you wouldn't characterize yourself as a pacifist, would you?
Sorry?
I said you wouldn't characterize yourself as a pacifist.
No, I didn't. I'm not a pacifist. No, sometimes you have to fight. If you attack me, I'll hit you back hard. Believe me. No, but you'd have to attack me first. I'm not going to reach across the table and start a fight with you. And there's the difference. And the whole argument about just war is the very, very narrow circumstances in which it is justified to make war.
Do you think it's fair to say?
And they are narrow. War is unbelievably horrible. Have you ever actually? I've never been a war reporter. I don't. The whole war junkie business I dislike. But I've been by accident on the edges of a couple of armed conflicts. It's horrible. It's unspeakably foul. Nobody in his right mind would voluntarily set off on a course which led to it.
Do you think it's fair to say, I mean, I think the link between World War I and the demise of European Christianity is an interesting link, but the way you describe it, and I think quite rightly, is that Christianity had been hijacked and politicized. Don't you think that process had happened well before 1914, and it just simply manifested itself on a global scale?
True, but you want to ask, you want the moment at which that actually has its effect. 1914 is the pivotal moment in the history of the last 1,000 years. No more important date.
What role, if any, do you feel that in what shreds of British Christianity remain? To what degree is it connected with the Bible at all, or is it just simply some sort of cultural?
Obviously, but you see, this is precisely what's gone. If my aunt or uncle was still alive, or indeed my father, they could have sat here, and they could have. My aunt particularly, and my uncle as well, I don't so much my father, I think perhaps, but he didn't take to it so much, could have conversed to you about the Bible with lengthy quotation and profound knowledge, because until 1914, for most educated persons, and by that I don't just mean people who go to university, and people who'd left school at 13, knew the Authorized Version of the Bible pretty much by heart. All the stories in it, everything in it. It influenced everything they did because it was part of being English. I think I don't know as much about Scotland. I'm not Scottish, but or Wales, but something similar would have been true there as well. The penetration of Holy Writ into the minds of the people was immense.
Even in your own youth, wasn't?
Well, there was still a bit of it, but it was
Christian theological education.
It was vestigial. It was still, there was an attempt, but I caught the very end of it. I saw it depart rather than I saw the train depart rather than being on it. I know what it looked like, and I wanted to be on it in some ways, but I saw it go, and I know it's gone. It's not there anymore. And I was the last. I mean, just as I am almost the last person to have been taught feet and inches, yards, pounds, stones, miles, chains, furlongs, and understand them. I'm almost the last person to know that, because the Cultural Revolution came down round about my 11th or 12th birthday and began to cut off children who were brought up after that date completely. So that I'm familiar with what I don't know in a way that people 5 years younger than me are not. But I don't know it. I'm familiar with the fact that I don't know it. I know better what I don't know.
I'm reminded of an incident. You're speaking on this. Just reminded me of this. I was riding with your brother, and we were studying the Gospel of John together, at least going through it. And he's reading. I'm driving, and he begins to read John chapter 1, and he starts. In the beginning was the Word, and then he said, I think I remember this from my childhood, and he put it down, and he said, in the Word was and I thought that was fascinating, and when I asked him, how did he know? Was that something he had recently? He said that he'd had it as a child.
I'll tell you exactly how he knew, because it is usually read either as gospel or as a lesson at services at Christmas, and he would probably, at school, have been required to read it out loud more than once. And would therefore have partly absorbed it. He's very good, was very good at learning things by heart as well. So he would pick up. He had a natural ability to do that.
Do you see figures, certainly as I do?
And anyway, the whole point about the Authorized Version of the Bible is that it was written to be remembered.
Mm-hmm. It was written to be read.
Well, yeah, but that too. But it was also written to be remembered. The whole idea was that people who couldn't necessarily read, once they heard it, would remember it. And that's half the point of cadences. The music in words make them more memorable. There's a famous incident where in the middle of a battle, Horatio Nelson is standing on the quarterdeck of some ship with shot and shell flying around, and a messenger boy rushes up to tell him something, and is so overawed by the presence of the admiral that he can't speak. And Nelson says, "Sing it, boy, sing it." And when the boy sings it, he remembers it, because singing unlocks the memory, because music unlocks in the memory things. It's just why you can remember hymns more readily you can remember poems, because they come with music, and the Authorized Version of the Bible is full of music.
So do you see religious figures in Britain, such as, let's say, the Archbishop of Canterbury, is completely irrelevant?
Well, to me,
yeah.
The Church of England is a bureaucracy. It's largely political. It made a great compromise with the state in the 1940s. It believed in some ways that the arrival of the welfare state was the attainment of the kingdom of heaven. It had become very bound up with with so-called Christian socialism, and the belief that a government devoted to some form of social egalitarianism and welfare was effectively the attainment of its aims. And it still is like that. But I ignore the Church of England and its hierarchy and almost everything it does. And to me, the Church of England is the Book of Common Prayer and the Authorized Version of the Bible. And the rest of it is just a sort of growth on top, which comes and goes with the seasons. I don't pay much attention to it.
Interesting comment.
I quite liked Rowan Williams when he was Archbishop. He seemed to me to be a man of genuine learning and sincerity. I've barely met Justin Welby, so I can't comment upon him. But I don't pay much attention to that.
So the church becoming tied up with the welfare state. You see this as actually fairly disastrous.
I can see the point of it, but I think it was. You can see why some of these measures would draw applause from a Christian mind person. There's a lot.
But it divorces the gospel from actual benevolence.
A lot to be yes, but in some ways it does. In some ways it doesn't. Maybe there's a lot to be said for some of it, but they took it too seriously, and they thought it was too, and they became too close to government, and they couldn't see the distinction between converting the state and converting the soul. And it was the moment of the nationalization of conscience. Instead of individual conscience, we had social conscience.
Well, something very similar happened in the States with the Great Society, in
yeah,
64.
It's a complete parallel, really.
Yeah.
Lyndon Johnson is really an English social democrat in politics in terms of the Great Society.
Islam.
Yes.
You made the comment earlier that you think 50, 100 years, Britain could be an Islamic state.
Yeah.
For an American, an outsider, explain to us what is happening in Britain.
Well, the main thing that's happening is that we've had very large-scale migration from countries where Islam is strong. And Islam is completely impervious to, it doesn't care what Richard Dawkins says about it or anybody else. It's not, it doesn't have any doubts about it. So.
I'm not keen to assimilate.
Absolutely not. No, it believes that it should it resists any attempts to secularize it or push it out of existence. And it doesn't like. I mean, I always used to laugh when George W. Bush used to say they hate our way of life. I said, well, I hate our way of life as well. Who in his right mind wants a way of life which is full of recreational drugs and extramarital sex and pornography? I loathe it, they loathe it. I'm with the Muslims on that. I hate our way of life. And who can blame them for standing aloof from it?
What is a proper response to the radical Islam in the West?
Oh well, you see, again, this is why the American approach is different because the level of, you must see this in France as well, and you'll see it in Italy, you'll see it in the Netherlands and Belgium and Germany as well, where Islam is a very substantial presence. I mean, I'm sure that I know that some evangelicals set out to try and evangelize among the Muslims, and good luck to them. It's possible they may have some success. So the problem is, of course, that there are no exits from Islam. It's a house with many entrances and no exits.
I have friends who've done it with some success, but
they
at risk of their own
quiet
lives.
about it.
Yeah.
Because it's not. No, you can if you come up against serious Islam, the penalty for apostasy is death.
Yeah.
And they mean it.
But you'll be interested in
it.
But
so the American attitude towards this is entirely different because American mass immigration has been from Latin America. And your society has indeed been transformed by mass immigration since the 60s, as ours has, but it hasn't been transformed in the same way because it hasn't been predominantly Islamic. And if Christianity were itself stronger and had more self-confidence, then maybe it could stand up against this. But because it doesn't have any self-confidence, because it's weak, and because it retreats in the face of criticism, and it doesn't really, in many cases, believe in its own gospels, it doesn't have much of a chance against Islam, of which none of those things can be said. All of which having said, I don't like Islam as a set of beliefs, and I have often argued with Muslims about it, and actually find that in doing so, they would much rather that you argued with them than that you had no faith of your own. Most of the Muslims I know in this country are shocked by the weakness of Christianity and wish it were more Christian. It's not that they've come here with the intent of colonizing it and making it an Islamic society. It's just that there is, here it is, the house is swept and garnished, ready for someone to move in. There is, and when growth, economic growth, and consumerism and all these other temporary materialist creeds fail, as fail they must in a country which can't pay its own bills, and there is a religious revival in this country, I would think Islam would be the most likely beneficiary.
So I gather you feel that that this Muslim influx really hasn't stimulated any kind of meaningful Christian response in this country.
No.
Yeah. The new atheists. What's your general impression?
Well, they discovered there was quite a lot of money in publishing books like that.
So you see
Congratulations, well done. I wish I could mine the same vein.
Do you see this as largely just simply a ploy, or that they have a real agenda?
I don't think I have anything particularly new to say, but I think there is definitely in the United States a problem, which is that what I call selfism, that fundamentally this misreading of John Stuart Mill, to believe that we're all wholly sovereign over our own bodies. And this thing which you hear people say again and again and again, particularly if you argue about drugs, because the arguments about sex are more or less finished. But you can still argue about whether it's right to take drugs. And people will come back to you and say, with real venom and fury and self-righteousness in their voices, how dare you tell me what I can do with my own body? This is the fundamental belief of the young person all over the wealthy West. And these people brought up often in Christian homes in smallish or medium-sized towns where Christian pastors were still influential and Christianity was still treated as a serious force, then go to college to this garden of earthly delights of sex and drugs and rock and roll, and indeed drink. And they find somebody who is saying in an intellectually respectable, literate fashion, all your pastors in your hometown, all your parents were all wrong. The things which are restraining you from doing what you want to do are all rubbish. That's why those books sold so well, because what people wanted was somebody intellectual, intelligent and literate to validate their own selfishness. And in America, which had not undergone the catastrophe of 1914, and where religious belief, certainly in ostensible terms, is still strong, the young needed that validation, and that's why I think those books sold so well.
Well, what has fascinated me with this modern breed of atheism, guys like Sam Harris, Dawkins, I see increasingly moving towards Harris's utilitarianism, which is extraordinarily dangerous, is their historical naivete. It's almost it's as if they've airbrushed out of history any of the atrocities that atheism can be linked with.
Well, yeah, even there, but there was another.
And yet your brother wasn't historically naive.
No. I don't begin to fathom what was going on there.
At first, getting Peter Hitchens to the restaurant at all was difficult, but in the end, leaving it was even more challenging. I was on a strict schedule, and unfortunately, I had to cut off the interview rather abruptly. That he was enjoying himself immensely was evident. So was I, but a train for Oxford was awaiting me. I paid the bill, and we meandered outside onto the sidewalk where we talked a bit more before saying our goodbyes. How does one process a Peter Hitchens? I suggest to you that we need more like him. We need more journalistic street fighters of this type. He isn't the least afraid of controversy. Peter is an Englishman and a Christian, probably in that order, and these things combined with an occasionally abrasive demeanor make him difficult for American evangelicals to understand. You see, American Christians endeavor to be, above all, inoffensive and polite. This simply is not a primary consideration for Peter. One need only read one of his columns to see that this is so. Writing on Stephen Fry, the actor and homosexual activist who is a leading figure of the cultural left in Britain, Peter writes that Fry is, quote, a stupid person's idea of what an intelligent person is like. American evangelicals, especially Southern ones, wince a bit at such remarks. His Christianity, or rather his defense of it, is bare-knuckled. As someone whose life is dedicated to defending the gospel, I'm simultaneously drawn to this approach and repelled by it. That American Christians have gone soft, there's no doubt. Jesus was hardly unfamiliar with the concept of hurling tough words at one's opponents. On one occasion, Jesus called the Pharisees a brood of vipers, and in another, he characterized the temple as a den of thieves. But we aren't used to that kind of talk anymore. If you are chiefly concerned with tone, as so many people are in the United States, guys like Peter Hitchens are going to jar you. I walked away thinking that if he was too ready to offend people, American Christians are too reluctant to offend them. Some of you will ask why we didn't discuss Christopher. That is because Peter made it clear in advance of our meeting that he did not want to discuss his brother. The topic has, no doubt, become somewhat tiresome to him. All the more so when one considers the fact that so many American evangelicals have, as Peter points out, foolishly fawned over the deceased atheist. Didn't they know that he made his living blaspheming their God? Peter would simply rather discuss other things. If you would like to read Peter Hitchens, you will find his columns in the Daily Mail, a British newspaper, as well as in his blog. We hope you have enjoyed this Fixed Point Foundation interview.